Well, hello everyone. Thank you for tuning in today. Welcome to It's Time for More Injury Funding, the podcast for all who want to learn about legal funding and its significance in the personal injury, trekking law, workers' compensation, medical malpractice, dog bite cases, and many other types of law practice domains. I'm your host, Laura, founder and CEO of More Injury Funding, the legal funding counselors with passion for law, medicine, legal funding, and heart for all suffering individuals. More Injury Funding is a sponsor, member, associate, board member, or business partner of this podcast, Georgia Trial Lawyers Association, Academy of Trek Accident Attorneys, Sandy Springs Bar Association, Georgia Association for Women Lawyers, GOL for short, Georgia Association for Paralegals, Atlanta Legal Aid Society, State Bar of Georgia, St. Andrew Rowing Club, Georgia Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, and Georgia Council of Chiropractic. In today's episode, I have a special guest, trial attorney Jami Oliver with Oliver Law Office, who is the Lawyer of the Year in 2024 in Columbus, Ohio. Product Liability Litigation Plaintiffs by Best Lawyers in America, also named Best Lawyer 2024 in three areas of practice: litigation, labor and employment, medical malpractice law plaintiffs on the plaintiff side, and product liability law on the plaintiff side as well. Today, we'll delve into delicate and sensitive questions of what family can expect after wrongful death from the attorney's perspective, after decades of working with families after a tragedy. We'll also talk about the legal part and the emotional aspect of death claims. And at the end of our episode, I have prepared a fun pop-up question to make it easier and lighter on us at the end of our episode. So stay tuned then. Welcome to Sign for More Injury Funding Podcast, Jami.
Thanks for having me.
Wow, what an astonishing array of nominations in the legal world that you have, Jami. Tell us a little bit about yourself and how you started the Oliver Law Office.
It's so humbling to hear that out loud. I sort of just keep my head down and do my work, and I lose track of some of these accolades and things. But I actually got started in personal injury sort of 30 some years ago by accident, if you will. And well, first of all, I knew I always wanted to be a lawyer since I was a little girl. So I'm one of those, I call myself a strange person, one of those people who always knew what I wanted to do since I was little. Like, obviously I was meant to do that. But I fell into personal injury. It was the first job. I was offered a job in a personal injury law firm in Columbus, Ohio, before I even started law school. Somebody had found me. I was a writer in college. I was a writing major, and somebody from my school, a graduate, had found me. He owned a law firm and contacted me and said, "If you come to Ohio State, let me know you have a job."
That's
And I had no
impressive.
idea. So that's what I did. That's how I got here. That's my
Wow.
story.
I absolutely love it. Today, we'll talk about a difficult topic, and that is about some aspects of wrongful death. Let's start our conversation with your legal perspective about understanding wrongful death. Can you explain what constitutes a wrongful death in legal terms, and how does it differ from other personal injury claims?
Sure. So a wrongful death is essentially the result of some type of negligence. So a personal injury, it could be a car crash, could be a trucking accident, could be a slip and fall on a premises type, somebody hits their head and passes away. But a wrongful death is essentially that ultimate injury that comes from the negligence of a third party. The wrongful death can come from, say, a defective product. If you say take a recalled drug and you end up being injured and then ultimately die as a direct and proximate result of taking that bad drug, we call it, or a medical device or something, that can also be a wrongful death. So wrongful death is sort of just the end result of the personal injury.
Mhm. When a family experiences a wrongful death, what are the first legal steps they should take immediately following the loss of their loved one?
Well, we give this advice for our personal injury clients also, but it's important for everybody, whether you've lost somebody you love or whether you've simply sustained a serious injury, and that is you've got to preserve the evidence. In today's day and age, in this world where evidence can disappear with a click of a button, it becomes even more urgent for people to get to an attorney quickly. And if they can't get to an attorney quickly, at least do what they can do to preserve evidence. And by that, I mean like audio, video, people with cameras in the area who might have caught the accident or the incident. These a lot of times you'll see these video cameras on the pole, on poles up in intersections or on the side of a building. We're getting a lot of folks that are able to go into a drugstore or something and get a copy of video that captured an incident. And if we don't get those early, they do disappear. They do write over them. They do destroy them. And so for me, that's a no-brainer advice is you got to collect the evidence. You got to take the pictures. You got to retrieve them and save them. And if you can't, obviously because you're with somebody in the hospital or you're at a funeral, you've got to get a lawyer. You've got to get somebody that knows how to do that for you.
Great tips, great tips. Now let's navigate the legal process for a moment. What can families expect in terms of the legal timeline for a wrongful death claim? How long does the process typically take from start to finish?
It really depends on the case, to be completely straight up about that. And it depends on the state you're in, right? So I would say normally most wrongful death cases, you're going to need to file a lawsuit. Those don't settle very easily, very often. And so a lawyer is going to have to get that case put together, get all of the bills, the funeral expenses, all of that put together, put the evidence together, put a complaint together. And so you're looking at probably an average of 1 to 2 years for that whole process to happen. And if you end up having to actually try the case, you're looking at probably more than 2 years just because of the court backlog still. We're getting caught up, but we're still a little bit backlogged in the civil arena. So anywhere between 1 and 3 years. I know it's a big that's a big window, but yeah, that's why it's really important to get things moving sooner rather than later.
But that's usually, it sounds like it's a typical, I would say, more, typical personal injury case, which could take anywhere from about 14 to 16 to year and a half.
Yeah.
So
I think
sounds
that's right.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So in wrongful death cases, there are a few classes of damages, if we can call them classes. Could you elaborate on the different types of damages that can be claimed in a wrongful death case?
Sure. So wrongful death cases really are divided into two major categories. One is survivorship claims and one is wrongful death claims. The survivorship claim is meant to compensate the actual deceased person. So the person who's been killed, if they had conscious pain and suffering before they died, that's called a survivorship claim. That is what we call a non-monetary claim, which means the value of the pain and suffering. And we don't know what that is. That's something a jury really has to decide what did they go through and what is that worth? Mm-hmm. Some people are killed instantly, for whatever reason. And in those cases, we may not have a survivorship claim, but we would definitely have a wrongful death claim. And those claims are brought by the next of kin. So the siblings, the parents, the adult children, even the minor children. And that is meant to compensate the family for, again, non-economic damages, and that means not out-of-pocket damages. Those are damages for the loss of consortium, we call. And basically that is loss of love, loss of support, loss of caring, all of those things that we sort of expect from our family and that we deserve to have from our family that's taken away from us. And again, a jury has to put a value on that. And then a subcategory of that, if you will, is that economic loss, right? And so if you've lost a caregiver, somebody that was supporting their family, the breadwinner, those lost wages, that's money taken away from the family. And so those are actually economic numbers that we can put hard numbers to and cement those damages. So you have economic and non-economic damages, as we call them. And then you have survivorship damages, which are meant for the deceased. which then flows through their will or through their estate.
Mhm.
And then you have the damages for the next of kin, the surviving next of kin.
Mhm. And in all these years of experience, what would you say? How do these damages help families cope with their loss?
Obviously, no amount of money is going to bring the person back. It's just, anyone that's ever lost anyone knows that you can't, there's no amount of money they would take for that person's life. But what it does is it gives the family a sense of um, being able to express their grief, being able to feel like somebody understood the value of that forever loss for them. And so it's really it's an important thing that we have in society that's available for those folks. What I have seen personally in my practice is when the case is finally over by settlement or by verdict, there is a sense of relief.
Mhm.
There is they're never going to get that person back. That money is never going to make them happy in that sense, but a sense of relief that somebody heard them, somebody understood their loss was real, and somebody put a value on it.
Mhm.
And, you move on with your life. I mean, these folks, by the time they leave our office, they're family to us.
Mhm.
We talk to them really for the rest of their adult lives. And it's an important cathartic, I guess I would call it a cathartic thing, but it's more about being heard and understood.
And you're doing such a wonderful job. Thank you for being you and for everything that you do, Jami.
Thank you. Of course.
Now, let's talk about proving liability. What are the key elements that need to be established to prove wrongful death in court?
To prove, again, this is true of any injury, right? Any negligent act, whether it results in a permanent injury or a death, there are certain things you have to prove. To prove liability, you have to prove that somebody owed you a duty, somebody breached that duty, and somebody caused you damage. And that's the old law school 101, 101 definition of liability. You've got to be able to prove those elements. To do that, especially in car crashes and product cases, it's really fairly simple. Like somebody hits you or causes an accident. Obviously, if they rear end you, that's pretty clear that they didn't maintain their assured clear distance, right? But sometimes we get into disputes about who was left of center, right? So that's what we call a liability dispute. And in those situations, you need accident reconstructionists. You may need conspicuity experts that talk about vision and what a normal driver would have seen under those circumstances. All kinds of experts that can come in and look at photos and measure damage and determine, and they have to use what's called the scientific certainty. So they can't just guess. They have to have measurable and meaningful ways of determining who is at fault. Like
Mhm.
whose fault was it? Who had the last chance to avoid this incident or this injury? And in product cases, right, it's whether did you use the product as it was intended? Were you using it for something that was never intended for? And did you read the warnings? So proving liability can be a little bit different depending on what kind of negligence we're talking about. But in car crashes, it's really about accident reconstruction, conspicuity, human reaction times, and those black boxes in the cars that we all have now in every modern car.
Thanks
That's
goodness.
that, thank goodness, because it's you really can't dispute that much.
Mhm.
And so that as long as those are preserved, and that's why I go back to where we started with, which is what's your advice to people that have suffered a wrongful death in their family, is get that evidence right away or get an attorney to get it right away.
And how, you kind of touched, but can you summarize how do you gather evidence for these cases? Is there a specific
Yeah.
formula that you follow?
Not so much a formula, except that when it comes in, we're kind of all over it. And so it's a matter of getting the team together and saying, okay, what do we think is out there and how do we get it? And then we send people sort of scatter them in all different directions. But the biggest thing is making sure the police are doing their job. And by that, I mean calling them, bugging them, the detectives involved, making sure they have saved that black box data, we call it, the module from the cars or the trucks, calling the Department of Transportation if it's a trucking case. If, like if it was a product at somebody else's home, right, making sure they've preserved it. And sometimes we use private investigators, right? We'll send them out and say, contact everybody on the street and see if anyone saw anything. We do that quite frequently,
Mm.
but really it's about, and if you don't have a lawyer yet helping you, experienced lawyer helping you with that sort of thing, then what you want to do is you yourself want to go to those stores around the area if it was a car crash and you
Mhm.
want to find out who had camera. You just look up. You'll see
Mhm.
the cameras, you know.
Mhm.
And actually sometimes I find it's actually more effective to send a grieving family member into the local grocery store to ask for a copy of the tape from the day before or the week before than it is a private investigator.
Hmm. Is
Because
it?
yeah, the manager might actually just say, you know what, I don't care what corporate says about this. I'm going to give you a copy of this.
Mhm.
And they do the right thing, and that's the right thing to do. Is to give them a copy. It's not. I mean, technically, it's their property because the camera is on their property, and technically, you need a police officer or a warrant to get that sort of thing. And sometimes we just end up filing suit very quickly so that we can issue a subpoena because a subpoena is essentially a warrant. And so
Mhm.
they cannot ignore a subpoena, but you've got to do it fast because you don't want those things to disappear.
Great tip.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. It's important to always consider the role of insurance companies. How should families deal with insurance companies after wrongful death? What are some common pitfalls to avoid when negotiating with them?
Yeah. I wouldn't talk to him, to be honest. I've been doing this a long time and I have seen stuff and heard stuff you would not even, it would just kind of blow your mind. I don't think you should talk to him. I think you should have a lawyer, and especially in a wrongful death case. I mean, if it's a small fender bender that you want to handle yourself, that's a different story. But the one thing people don't understand is that they don't have to give the insurance company or the adjuster a recorded statement.
Mm.
You have no obligation to do that. They'll make it seem like you do. And they may ask you questions and get you confused, and you may end up saying something that ends up hurting your case or your family member's case. Don't talk to them. Don't talk to them.
Mhm.
Just let the lawyer handle that.
I love that.
Yeah.
Clients always worry about the lawyer fees. Can you explain
Yeah.
how contingency fee arrangements work in wrongful death cases? What should families know before signing agreements with attorneys?
Yeah. My gosh, that's a really good question. And that's something we don't talk about. And we should be talking about that. Lawyers generally handle negligence cases on a contingency. That's what plaintiff lawyers do. That's what litigators do. And it's been like that forever. And the reason it's like that is because most people cannot afford to pay a lawyer's hourly fees, not like a corporation does. They can afford to pay a 30 or 40 or $50,000 retainer to a lawyer to work on a case. Individuals can't, and that's sort of the reason for the contingency. That means the lawyer does not get paid unless you get paid. You've probably seen commercials on that, but
Mm.
but that's the truth. And so they take a percentage. Generally, in a normal negligence case, it's 1/3. In litigation, which is usually wrongful death, it can go up to 40%. Lawyers are free to contract with whatever percentage they want to offer to the public, and they can negotiate. But for the most part, you're going to see that the really good lawyers that are in high demand are going to kind of offer you a contingency percentage that they use, and that's going to be it. Most lawyers are not going to negotiate that because they know what it costs to get that case to trial or to get the settlement that the family needs. The one thing I'll say about contingency fees, and I've been working for the little guy, the small guy, my whole entire life. Um, in my opinion, most people are better off with a contingency lawyer and paying them than they are trying to do it themselves. And I've had so many people tell me that. I've looked at settlements that other people have had, without a lawyer. I know what I could have done for them under those circumstances. And so I feel pretty good about the fact that what we offer and what most plaintiff lawyers offer their clients in terms of the percentage at the end of the case is worth it. And most of those clients, I think, at the end are pleased. I would
Hmm.
hope so. Most
Hmm.
of mine are.
Yes, listen to Jami Oliver, everybody. So, Jami, we talked about the wrongful death cases from the legal perspective, and now let's look at them from the emotional impact point. From your experience, what are some of the most common emotional challenges families face after wrongful death, and how they can begin to cope?
Well, I'm definitely not a psychologist, but what I see a lot is the displacement of the anger onto the lawyer and the staff. It's we're prepared for that. It does happen from time to time. When they first call you, people are obviously distraught in a wrongful death situation. And so the beginning usually is a little chaotic just because you've got, criminal hearings and sentencing and funerals and all of those really traumatic things in the very beginning. So there's a lot of sadness. Um, you talk about the stages of grief. These folks that you're representing, that we're representing, is going through the stages of grief. And
Mm,
so a lot of times the initial thing is very, very, very sad. And so you have to be very, very patient and caring and empathetic and listen. But then you always see an anger phase. You always see it. It always comes. And and I warn people about it. And I say, eventually you're going to feel this anger for this other person or for the insurance company a lot of times.
mm,
Let's keep it directed where it needs to be directed.
mm,
Um, and I really think my approach to that up front really builds a strong relationship with the client. And sometimes I call them out, if they start going through an angry phase and maybe my receptionist or somebody's getting the brunt of it, I call them out and in an empathetic, caring way, and we sit down and talk about it. But I think the emotions of losing somebody are I don't want to say the same, but similar to what you might see if you lost a loved one slowly to cancer or you lost somebody quickly to cancer. It's traumatic and they have to go through the stages.
mm.
And eventually what you want is the acceptance at the very end, and a sense of gratitude that you were there to help them through the stages.
Mm. And when it comes to support systems for grieving families, what resources or support mechanisms do you recommend for families navigating both the legal and emotional landscapes after such a tragedy?
Yeah. I believe that everybody should have at least one session with a grief counselor, at least one. I can't always convince all of my clients to do it, but I think it needs to happen. And here in Columbus, we have every city, actually, every state has resources for free grief counselors. They're out there. And a lot of times it's one visit or it's 10 visits, but they're out there. If the client or the family member has health insurance, a lot of times you'll get coverage for 6 or 7 visits, for grief counseling, but it's really, really important that they do that. And again, you can't convince everyone to do it, but the resources are there and we maintain a list and we provide it. And I talk to them and when they come in about doing that, and I explain the stages of grief, at least as much as I, being a non-psychologist, understand them, and try to encourage them to work with somebody professional who gets it and can help them move between the stages. So I think that answers your question.
Mm-hmm. Jami, when we talk about balancing grief with legal action, can you explain how families can balance between grieving their loss and pursuing a legal claim? What advice do you have for managing these two aspects simultaneously?
Well, they're two separate things, and I try to encourage them to remember that. So you still need to spend the time with your family. You need to go through the grieving process. The firsts are always hard. The first Christmas, the first birthday, the first holiday, the first Thanksgiving, those are hard. That first year is absolutely awful. And you're going to have to just go through it, swim through it. We try to leave our clients alone the best we can for that first year. We contact them with regard to important information, and reach out to check on them, make sure they're doing okay, and make sure they're getting, the grief counseling and things. But they're really two separate things. And it's strange because they're separate things, and yet, like I said, they can bleed into each other. And so I think it's just awareness on the part of the law firm and the lawyer that that's happening. It really helps that the client knows it's going to happen. But I sort of say to my folks, let us handle this. Let us take something off your plate while you do what you need to do, which is be with your family, go to the funeral, get through all those firsts. There's going to be a lot of crying. There's going to be a lot of heartache, but I've been through it. I've lost some very, very close people. I've lost my sister. I lost my mom. I've lost a lot of people. And I know how it feels that first year. And so even though we're here working on this case actively every day, every week, we're not going to remind you every day and every week that your family member is gone, because you already know that. You're already working through it. So yeah, that's hopefully that was helpful.
Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing the story and these ideas and tips. It's essential for you as trial attorney to consider communication with loved ones. We just talked about communication. What are some effective ways families can communicate about the legal process and emotional journey while ensuring everyone is supported and heard? What type of communication and support do you practice at your law firm?
Mm-hmm. We generally communicate with our families in whatever way is best for them. And so it can be different for each person. A lot of people nowadays just want to communicate by text, and they just want really the highlights of what's happening. And so we try to stick with that. Occasionally we get somebody, especially an older individual who doesn't really text and isn't really tech savvy, and they want more one-on-one. They want to come in and sit in the conference room with you and tell you a story and make sure you understand and get all their questions answered and make sure you understand where they're coming from. And that's fine too. So even though we have a process and internal procedure and standard operating procedures for our office, we make sure that it is consistent with what that particular client needs and what they expect.
Wrongful death has long-term effects for all remaining family members. In your experience, how can the wrongful death of a loved one affect family dynamics over time? What steps families can take to foster healing and unity?
I think understanding in the beginning that any wrongful death settlement or verdict is not going to bring their loved one back is the first thing. Because what you don't want to happen is the family to start fighting over a recovery or how to split up a recovery. And that is not, when and if that happens, that it makes me feel like I have done something wrong, honestly, that I've led them down the wrong path. And so it's really important to understand that because of this anger, it can lead to dissension in the family. And we don't want the case to become about money, because it's not about money. We talked about that earlier in this podcast. It's just not about money. And so I think awareness, it's just like they tell you with, self-help books and podcasts, awareness is the first step. You yourself have to be aware of what you're feeling, why you're feeling it, and how you're expressing that to others in the family, and then talk to your family members about it. And I feel like the more time you spend around the dinner table, even with extended family, bring them in on the holidays and let's talk about the loss, and honor the loved one. I think that helps with the healing. But the healing only comes through understanding and self-awareness.
Mm-hmm. Jami, we touched on some great aspects of legal and emotional issues of wrongful death cases. Now, I want to ask you for your personal insights and delve into lessons learned. After decades of working with families in these situations, what are some of the most impactful lessons you've learned about resilience and healing?
I think probably my personal experiences over the last 30 plus years have been that we're all in this, we're all in this life together. I mean, that's what it comes down to. If it can happen to you, it can happen to me. And if it can happen to me, it can happen to you. And so I think that empathy for what others are going through is really I think that's really what I've brought into my practice and carry with me. I understand, but for the grace of God go I, right? That's how I feel every single day. And I also feel, and I said this earlier, I also feel like the recovery in a wrongful death case is not about the money. It's about being heard and being understood so that the loss um, is processed. The loss is processed.
Mm. What is one piece of advice you would give to families who are unsure about pursuing a wrongful death claim?
I would recommend finding the best personal injury wrongful death attorney in the area and just asking them. Get an appointment, get on the phone with them, call them, get on a Zoom, it doesn't matter, and just run the issue you have by them. You don't have to pay them anything for that. Most lawyers are going to get on the phone for free, and a lot of them will even meet with you in the office for free just so they can answer your questions. There's absolutely no obligation. So I would recommend just meet with them and talk to them. See if you can get your questions answered and see if they think it's worth pursuing.
Mm. Looking ahead, what changes do you hope to see in the legal system regarding wrongful death cases that would better support grieving families?
Right. Um, uh, Quite honestly, what I would like to see is these cases move a little more quickly through the court system. And I realize that's a very complicated issue and probably a very political issue, is my guess. But it has to do with funding. It has to do with the number of judges on the bench. Maybe if we could also do a little more court-oriented or court-sponsored settlement conferences and mediations to get some of these cases resolved earlier rather than later in the litigation process. I think that would be easier on the family members and certainly saving costs in the long run for the lawyers, the clients, and the system as a whole. So I think there's definitely a systemic issue that could be addressed eventually, although I realize we live in a complicated world and it may take a lot of doing to get there, but I think that's what I would like to see happen.
And these are beautiful ideas. And again, this was so great talking to you today, Jami. I hope this episode about legal and emotional aspects of the grieving families from the professional view of yourself was informative and educational to everybody. And as promised, here's a fun pop up question for you. You ready, Jami?
Sure, let's do it.
Okay. If you could have a superpower, what would it be and how would you use it in your profession?
If I had a superpower,
Hmm.
I think I would be a super mediator.
Okay.
And I would and I would be able to get the parties together to get cases resolved early and save everybody a lot of headache and anguish.
I love it. Short, brief, right to the point. Okay. Well, maybe one day you will, right? I mean,
Right, yeah.
you could still, practice law and mediate. I know quite a few attorneys who do that. I don't know how they do it time wise, but it's I hear it's amazing. Getting away from daily practice of law is just something that a lot of attorneys love doing. So maybe we'll see you doing that
Never
very
know.
soon as well. Again, Jami, that was amazing time spent with you today. And if anybody needs your help or is looking for Oliver Law Office, how can they reach you?
You can reach us on our website, which is www.oliverattorneys.com. very easy. Or you can find us by searching in Google for Oliver Law Office in Columbus, Ohio. We are here.
I love it. That was again trial attorney Jami Oliver, founder and CEO of Oliver Law Office in Columbus, Ohio. And we covered today what comes next, a guide for families facing wrongful death claims. I want to thank you all for listening and watching our story today. For more tips and tricks on legal funding and personal injury law and medicine related topics, follow me, download, like, and subscribe for It's Time for More Injury Funding podcast on several podcast platforms, including but not limited to Spotify, Amazon Music, Apple Podcasts, iHeart, and others worldwide. And follow More Injury Funding on LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, Pinterest, YouTube, Google Business Profile, and my website at moreinjuryfunding.com. I can't wait to see you, my dear listeners and viewers, on my next upcoming episode. Until then, be well. Thank you so much.